Hello and welcome back. This is Ron with Sandcar Services, and I am doing an Ebox to 2D conversion. We're going to call this one Part 3A. I'm a little bit out of sequence, but that's what I'm going to name this one. And let me explain to you what we're doing on this. So this is an Ebox Mendeola case. Now, it is pretty much identical to every 2D case. There was an error, well, not an error, but there was a problem with this case when it came in the fact that the rear main shaft bearing, which doesn't fit over a 2D shaft, is 30 millimeters in diameter on the outside. And the housing was cut for 30 millimeter inner diameter, and then this bearing was pressed in. But it won't work with the 2D shaft, so we had to take... This is a 2D bearing, rear main shaft bearing, and it fits on the shaft. See that? So we needed one of those at 38 millimeter outer diameter to fit in this case. So I had to ship this case back to my buddies up at Weddell. They're the manufacturers of all the Mendeola parts for the Sandcars now. And they needed to machine that out so that a 38 millimeter would fit, and they had to put a set screw or set bolt thread in it for me so that the bearing doesn't try to walk out. So it's got a little bolt right there with a washer on it. Doesn't hit anything in the transmission when it rotates, but it prevents that bearing from walking out if the case gets hot. So the next step that I have right now in this conversion, because we've already done a video on putting the gear carrier together, is actually heating this case up to 260 to 300 degrees and putting this gear carrier into the actual transaxle and lining everything up. Now, reverse gear is kind of a booger. So I use transmission assembly lube, and if you can see, I basically take a big chunk of it and I glue it into the 1-2 idler, or I'm sorry, the 1-2, called it an idler, it's a slider. Made a mistake there, do that often. The 1-2 slider, I glue that on, and then I glue the little slider pin. Sometimes there's a flag right there. I call it the flag rather than a pin. But if you put the selector shaft for a reverse, which is the lower one, if you pull it all the way out, which is the only way it can go, it will take the selector arm and push it all the way forward into reverse. So when you go to put this assembly in, you can reach in here with your finger and kind of line that gear up while simultaneously reaching around in here with your hand. And mind you, this is going to be really hot, and rotating the inner gear that's in on the other side. So one of the other updates that we did was customer had the old 6-spline reverse idler shaft, and because this old design had this notch on it, this gear could bounce on that notch because it's not a perfect fit. It's got some leverage. He was having trouble getting it into reverse, so I told him just change all this stuff out and put brand new reverse in it. Although this did not have to get done for an Ebox conversion. It could have stayed the way it was. We just wanted to make sure it wasn't going to have that problem. So at this point right now, what we have to do is we have to get this in. So I don't show how I do this. I'm actually planning on possibly shooting a video on how to build a 2D, but I need to figure out how to make it a pay-per-view video, because the information on building one of these will take a lot of stuff off my plate, basically, if you have the proper tools to be able to do it. So, but the one thing I will tell you that will make it a little bit easier on you is get yourself some long bolts, 3/8 24, cut the end of them off, and then take a die grinder and die grind a little slot in it so you can use a flathead screwdriver to unscrew these. This will help guide the pinion assembly into the housing and line up the holes so that you can suck that in with the 6 bolts, the 3/8 24 fine thread bolts that hold that in. And the other thing that'll help you out, like I said, is the reverse, putting it into reverse and gluing the gear down. So we have to heat this case. My next step is to heat this case to about 260 to 300 degrees, which will make the inner hole for the pinion expand larger than the actual pinion assembly itself to a point, and hopefully it'll slide in. We'll get some silicone on here. You'll notice there's some new studs because the Ebox had a shorter studs on the bottom, but we need full length all the way around, so we had to put some new studs in it. And then the next step after that is going to be putting the differential together and then modifying the bell housing for the new input shaft and that type of stuff right there. So that's pretty much it for what we have to do on this next step. So let's get this thing put together, and we'll see where we're at. Okay, so I managed to take some 3-bond sealant, which is the only sealant that I use on a Mendeola. Stuff is really similar to Bond if anybody's ever used that. And I got it around the gear carrier opening. And I have pre-lubed the rear main shaft bearing and pre-lubed the reverse when I heated the case and put all this together. So now I'm going to heat the case all the way around right here to 260 to 300 degrees, and then I am going to attempt to slide this in. Okay, so now I've got the gear carrier assembly in. You can see that the 2 guide bolts are sticking through the case. I have 3 bolts that I've put in. I've added red thread locker and I've tightened them down. And there are different opinions on what the torque rating is for these bolts, so I'll keep my torque ratings to myself. But now I can take and unscrew these. If they're sticky, then you can simply put a screwdriver on them and unscrew them, but sometimes they'll come out. So we get that done. And then if you look at the back of the transmission, I've got brand new hardware going on it, and it's seated up and the silicone is smashing out of the seal, and that is the proper way to do this. So now I'm going to let it cool down, pull it out of reverse, and then I will test reverse once everything cools down. Alright, so there's part 3A of Ebox to 2D conversion from Sandcar Services, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.